The pulse rifle came apart in Sergeant Jack Shepard's hands with practiced ease, each component floating in the zero-G of the deployment bay. He'd cleaned this weapon 10,000 times, could do it blindfolded, but today he watched each piece with laser focus. Anything to keep his eyes from drifting to the view screen that dominated the bay's forward wall. Through that massive window, the fleet stretched out like a metal galaxy. Hundreds of capital ships, thousands of support vessels, all converging on a single point in space. Titan Prime waited below, its perpetual storm system casting angry purple shadows across the planet's northern hemisphere. Somewhere down there, buried under kilometers of rock and storm clouds, the Grey Cloaks were waiting. Weapon maintenance isn't mandatory for another 12 hours, Sarge. Shepard caught a floating firing pin and slipped it back into place. Tell that to Rodriguez, Torres. Private Torres fell silent. 3 months ago, Rodriguez's rifle had jammed during a Grey Cloak raid on New Madrid. They'd found enough of him to bury, but not much more. Torres had been there too, they all had. That's why High Command had chosen their unit for this drop. The briefing still played in Shepard's mind, General Nelson standing before the assembled officers, his weathered face illuminated by the tactical display. Intelligence confirms this is their primary base of operations, she'd said, highlighting the massive underground complex. Every terror attack, every civilian massacre, every atrocity, it all leads back to here. Today we end the Grey Cloaks. Today we make them pay. The deployment bay filled slowly as more of Shepard's squad filtered in. Cortez running diagnostics on her jump jets. Watson and Yu checking seals on each other's combat suits. Brooks, the newest addition, trying to hide his trembling hands as he loaded magazines. They were good soldiers, all of them. Some of the best in the United Earth Defense Force. But they'd all lost something to the Grey Cloaks family, friends, homes. 10 minutes to initial bombardment, the ship's AI announced, its synthetic voice eerily calm. Shepard reassembled his rifle with swift, deliberate movements. Each click and snap echoed in the increasingly quiet bay. He looked at his squad, his people, and saw the same expression on every face. Not excitement, not fear, just grim determination. "Listen up," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We've been chasing these bastards across the galaxy for 5 years. Lost a lot of good people along the way. But today he locked his rifle's power core into place with a satisfying thunk. Today we're not chasing anymore." The deployment bay trembled as the first orbital strikes hit Titan Prime's atmosphere. Through the view screen, lances of energy pierced the cloud cover like inverse lightning, turning storm clouds to plasma. The Grey Cloaks had hidden from justice for too long, buried themselves too deep. But there was no bunker deep enough, no fortress strong enough to save them from what was coming. "Prep for drop in 5, the AI announced. Shepard Magnetic locked his rifle to his armor and looked at each member of his squad one last time. Brooks had stopped trembling. Cortez was humming an old war song under her breath. Watson and Yu bumped armored fists. Torres made the sign of the cross. "Remember," Shepard said, securing his helmet, "they're expecting an army." The corners of his mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Let's show them an apocalypse instead." The first tremors of distant explosions vibrated through the ship's hull as the main invasion force began their approach. Through the view screen, Shepard watched the storm-racked atmosphere of Titan Prime light up like a dying sun. Somewhere down there, in their underground fortress, the Grey Cloaks were about to learn a very important lesson. You can only sow terror for so long before the galaxy decides to reap. Drop pods, release in 5, 4. Shepard's stomach lurched as the magnetic clamps disengaged. Around him, hundreds of other pods broke free from their carrier ships, creating a meteor shower of military-grade titanium and cursing soldiers. His squad's vital signs flickered on his helmet display, elevated heart rates, but steady. They'd done this before. Just not through an electrical storm that could fry their pod's guidance systems. Purple lightning forked through the clouds, striking a pod 2 clicks to his right. The explosion lit up the storm like a flare. No time to think about whoever had been inside. They'd known the odds coming in. Multiple anti-aircraft batteries detected the pod's AI, warned. Evasive patterns engaged. The pod jerked hard left, then right, then into a spiral that had Shepard gritting his teeth. Through the small viewport, he caught glimpses of the battlefield below massive defensive walls rising from the mining colony's ruins, artillery emplacements spewing plasma into the sky, and the first waves of crawler tanks already engaging Greycloak forces. 30 seconds to impact. A nearby explosion rattled his pod, and warning lights flashed red. Hull integrity at 60%. 50, 40. Brace. Brace. The pod slammed into the ground with enough force to rattle Shepard's teeth, even through the impact gel. Emergency bolts blew and the hatch exploded outward. He was moving before his vision cleared, muscle memory taking over as he rolled into cover behind a chunk of broken ferrocrete. The battlefield was chaos. Drop pods rained from the sky like lethal hail while Greycloak anti-aircraft fire turned the storm clouds orange. Through the din, Shepard's command freck crackled to life. Squad, sound off. Torres, up and moving. Cortez here, jets took a hit but functional. Watson, clear. You, in position. B. Brooks, alive. I think. Good. All accounted for. Shepard popped up from cover, pulse rifle already tracking. 2 Greycloak soldiers in their signature gray stealth armor went down before they registered his presence. The third managed to trigger an alarm. Multiple contacts, 9 o'clock. Torres called out. Heavy weapons. A plasma mortar screamed overhead, turning a landing pad into molten slag. Through the smoke, Shepard spotted more Greycloak troops pouring from reinforced bunkers. Their movements were too precise, too coordinated for normal soldiers. Watch the enhanced ones, he barked, recognizing the telltale signs of bio-augmentation. Torres, you suppressing fire. Cortez, get those jets working and flank left. His squad moved like a well-oiled machine. Torres and you laid down devastating crossfire while Cortez's jump jets sputtered to life, carrying her above the chaos. Brooks proved himself by picking off a Greycloak sniper moments before it could target Watson. The ground shook as the first wave of crawler tanks reached their position. Each one was the size of a small building, bristling with enough firepower to level a city block. Their arrival sent the Greycloaks scrambling back toward their fortifications. Shepard, his command link crackled with General Nelson's voice. Your squad is designated Strike Team Alpha. We're detecting unusual energy signatures from Sublevel 3. Need your team to investigate while the main force draws their attention. Copy that. Shepard tagged a nav point on his squad's HUD. Form up on me. We're going underground. They fought their way forward through rubble and bodies. The Greycloaks contested every meter, but they'd never faced an assault of this magnitude. Orbital strikes continued to hammer their outer defenses, while mechanized infantry units pushed through the gaps. A massive explosion lit up the battlefield. Through the storm clouds, Shepard caught a glimpse of what had to be the largest ship he'd ever seen, the HYF Retribution, pride of the fleet, moving into low orbit. Its main gun could punch through a planet's crust. Sarge, Brooks called out. Found something. The young soldier stood before what looked like a maintenance tunnel entrance, half hidden behind collapsed buildings. The Greycloak bodies nearby suggested they'd died trying to defend it. Good eye, Kid. Shepard checked his rifle's charge. Torres, watch R6. Everyone else, prepare for close quarters combat. Whatever they're hiding down there, they don't want us to find it. As his squad stacked up at the entrance, Shepard took one last look at the battlefield above. Crawler tanks advanced in formation, their main guns turning night into day. Dropships continued to disgorge troops and equipment. The sky burned with anti-aircraft fire and orbital strikes. But something felt wrong. The Greycloaks were falling back too easily, almost like. They wanted us to find this entrance, he muttered, then keyed his comm. Command, be advised. This might be a trap. Acknowledged, Nelson replied. But it's a trap we need to spring. Proceed with extreme caution. Shepard nodded to his squad. Check your corners, watch for tripwires, and stay frosty. Whatever's down there, we're about to find out why the Greycloaks chose this place for their last stand. They descended into darkness, leaving the sound of battle behind. None of them noticed the strange symbols etched into the tunnel walls, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. The tunnel's darkness swallowed everything except the pale blue glow of their armor's running lights. Shepard's motion tracker showed nothing but his squad's signatures, but his neck hadn't stopped tingling since they'd entered this hole. Those symbols again, Torres whispered over the squad freck. Third set we've passed. Shepard's helmet cameras captured everything, but the strange geometric patterns seemed to resist analysis. Every time the VI tried to translate them, it threw back errors. A distant rumble reminded them of the battle raging overhead. Down here, though, the silence felt alive, watching. Movement, Brooks called out. 30 meters, multiple signatures. Hold position, Shepard ordered, but before they could take cover, the signatures vanished. Just disappeared. Cortez checked her scanner twice. Sir, that's not possible. Biosigns that strong don't just. The attack came from everywhere at once. Figures in advanced stealth suits materialized from the walls themselves. Their armor wasn't the usual gray cloak gray, it was black as deep space, seeming to bend light around it. And they moved wrong, like their bones weren't quite where they should be. Contact. Shepard opened fire, his pulse rifle's plasma bolts illuminating the tunnel in strobes of blue light. 2 attackers went down, but a third crossed the distance faster than any human could move, metal claws extending from its gauntlets. Brooks, down. Torres tackled the rookie as the claws passed through where his head had been. U's heavy repeater roared in the confined space, turning the attacker into composite armor fragments and something that wasn't quite blood. Fall back to the junction, Shepard commanded. Cortez, U suppressing fire. Watson, get that door sealed. They retreated in practiced leapfrog movements, each soldier covering the others. The enhanced gray cloaks pursued with inhuman determination, barely slowing when pulse rounds tore through them. Watson reached the heavy security door first, fingers flying over the control panel. 10 seconds. 5 contacts. Brooks' voice cracked. No. 8. 12. The tunnel strobed with weapons fire. Shepard saw one of the enhanced gray cloaks take a direct hit to the chest, its armor cracking to reveal what lay beneath. He wished he hadn't. Doors ready, Watson called. Everyone through. Move, move, move. They piled through the doorway as more black armored figures emerged from the shadows. Watson slammed the emergency lockdown controls, and foot-thick metal slabs slid into place with a final sounding boom. For a moment, only heavy breathing filled their comms. What the hell were those things? Brooks asked, his voice shaking. Sir, I saw under their armor. They weren't human. Shepard finished. No, not anymore. He'd seen the twisted flesh, the additional joints, the way their faces had been restructured. Command, are you receiving? Static answered. They were too deep. Cortez, you're our tech expert. What are we looking at? She was already analyzing data from their brief encounter. These readings, their cellular structure's been completely rewritten. This isn't normal bioengineering, it's like they've been rebuilt from the ground up. A horrifying screech of metal on metal came from the sealed door. They're cutting through, you reported grimly. Then we move. Shepard checked his map. We're close to sublevel 3. Whatever's putting out those energy signatures command detected, it's got to be connected to. That. He gestured at the door, where white-hot metal was starting to peek through. They pushed deeper into the facility, through corridors that looked more like arteries than architecture. The walls were lined with pods, hundreds of them. Most were empty, but some. Life signs, Torres reported, scanning one pod. They're collecting people. Civilians from their raids. Shepard approached one of the pods. Its transparent surface was frosted over, but he could make out a human form inside. The pod's readout showed vital signs, brain activity, power consumption. They're not just collecting them, he realized with growing horror. They're using them. Converting them. As if to confirm his words, they emerged into a massive chamber. Pods lined the walls all the way up to the distant ceiling, each connected to a central column of writhing energy. And in that energy, "That's impossible," Watson breathed. Shepard had seen a lot in his years of service. He'd thought nothing could shock him anymore. He was wrong. "Command needs to know what we've found," he said, his voice hard. "You set up a relay beacon. Torres, Watson, watch R6. Brooks, start downloading everything you can from their systems. Cortez, help me figure out how to shut this down." Sir Brooks called out after a moment, his voice strange. "You need to see this. It's their mission logs. The enhanced soldiers, the civilian abductions, this facility. It was never about terror. That was just to keep us distracted from their real goal. Which is preparation." Brooks looked up from the console, face pale behind his visor. "They're preparing humanity for something that's coming." A new sound filled the chamber then. Not the distant thunder of battle or the scream of cutting torches. This was deeper, ancient. It came from below, and when it pulsed through the facility's bones, the symbols on the walls flared with sickly light. Shepard Torres called out, fear in her voice for the first time since he'd known her. "The pods are opening." The sergeant raised his rifle as fluid began draining from hundreds of pods at once. They'd thought they were bringing the fight to the Grey Cloaks. They'd been wrong. The fight was just beginning. The pods exploded open like blooming flowers made of nightmares. Shepard's squad formed a defensive circle, weapons trained outward as fluid cascaded down the chamber walls. Multiple contacts use heavy repeater-tracked movement in the upper levels. No clear shots. Through his scope, Shepard caught glimpses of what emerged from the pods, human shapes twisted into something new. Not like the enhanced soldiers they'd fought before. These were further along in whatever horrific process the Grey Cloaks had devised. Brooks, Shepard barked. "What else is in those logs? What are they preparing us for?" The young soldier's fingers flew across the console. "It's, sir, they found something out there. Beyond the rim colonies. Something old. They say it's been watching us, guiding our evolution, and now it's coming to." A scream cut through the chamber, hitting frequencies that made their armor's sensors shriek. Shepard saw Torres stagger, her helmet systems temporarily overloaded. Before he could reach her, something dropped from above. It moved like liquid metal, its form constantly shifting. Where its surface caught the light, Shepard saw reflected faces, hundreds of them, all screaming. "Open fire." The squad's weapons blazed, turning the air into plasma and superheated metal. The creature split apart, each piece morphing as it hit the ground. What had been one enemy became a dozen, each wearing the faces of the civilians the Grey Cloaks had taken. "All back to the central column," Shepard commanded. "Cortez, can you overload the power core?" Negative, she fired a burst that passed straight through one of the creatures. "The controls are locked down. We'd need to watch out." A tendril of liquid metal shot toward Brooks. The rookie dove, but not fast enough. It caught his leg, and where it touched, his armor began to change, becoming part of the creature. No, Watson grabbed Brooks' arm, trying to pull him free. "Hold on." Shepard's mind raced. Regular weapons weren't working. They needed. The symbols on the walls pulsed again, and in that moment of illumination, Shepard saw it. The central column wasn't just powering the facility, it was containing something. The creatures weren't attacking randomly, they were herding the squad away from the controls. "You," Torres covering fire. "Watson, get Brooks clear. Cortez, with me." They fought their way to the control panel, passing through nightmarish shapes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. Shepard's armor integrity warnings flashed constant red as reality itself seemed to twist around them. Sir Brooks called out through gritted teeth, his armor slowly being consumed. "The logs. They're not just about what's coming. They're about what was here before. The Grey Cloaks, they found ruins under the storm. Older than humanity. They weren't building all this, they were rebuilding it." The central column's energy field fluctuated, and through it, Shepard caught a glimpse of something vast, ancient, waiting. "Cortez, can you redirect the power?" She worked frantically at the controls. "Maybe, but..." "Sir, the containment field is the only thing holding this thing back. If we shut it down..." We don't shut it down, Shepard interrupted, an idea forming. We overload it. Force a reaction. He keyed his emergency comm channel, broadcasting on all frequencies. Command, if you can hear this, begin immediate evacuation of all ground forces. Authorization, Shepard Delta 09. Sir Torres called out, her weapon running hot. Brooks' vitals are critical. We need to move. The creatures had stopped attacking. Now they were combining, flowing together into something massive. Something with too many eyes, all of them fixed on the squad. Shepard made his decision. Cortez set the overload. Everyone else, get Brooks and fall back to the tunnel. Now. Sir Watson protested. You can't. Hey. That's an order, soldier. Move. As his squad retreated, dragging Brooks with them, Shepard turned to face the growing horror before him. The walls themselves were beginning to ripple, reality breaking down as the ancient thing in the column stirred. Coming here was your mistake, he told the creatures, though he knew they weren't really in charge. Never had been. You wanted to prepare humanity? Reshape us, he armed every explosive charge on his armor. Here's your reshaping. The column's energy field began to shriek as Cortez's commands took effect. The creature lunged forward, a mountain of twisted flesh and stolen faces. Shepard smiled behind his visor and quoted what Rodriguez used to say before every drop. See you in hell. He fired into the column's control panel just as the creature reached him. The last thing he saw was a flash of light brighter than any sun, and in it, just for a moment, he thought he saw the true face of what the Grey Cloaks had awakened. Then everything went white. Torres half-carried, half-dragged Brooks through the tunnel as reality crumbled behind them. The rookie's armor had partially merged with whatever that thing had been, leaving him trapped in a twisted cocoon of metal and ceramic. But he was still breathing, and Torres hadn't lost a squad mate since Rodriguez. She wasn't about to start now. Move, Cortez shouted from behind them. Power readings are off the scale. The tunnel walls rippled like water, those damn symbols pulsing faster and faster. You and Watson led the way, cutting down the few remaining enhanced Grey Cloaks they encountered. None of them spoke about leaving Shepard behind. None of them had to. Their helmet comms crackled with sudden static. Then General Nelson's voice cut through all units. Emergency evacuation ordered. Repeat, all units withdraw immediately. The Retribution is detecting massive energy buildup beneath the surface. Almost to the exit, you reported. Brooks, stay with us. The symbols, Brooks mumbled, his voice weak. They're not just writing. They're a warning about what happens when you try to become something you're not meant to be. The first shockwave hit as they reached the maintenance tunnel's entrance. It felt like the planet itself was trying to tear itself apart. Above, the perpetual storm had turned into something else entirely, its clouds forming impossible patterns. Incoming dropship, Watson called out. 90 seconds. Torres looked back toward the depths they'd escaped from. The tunnel entrance was distorting, twisting in ways that hurt to look at. And in that writhing darkness, she thought she saw movement, something massive stirring. He knew, Brooks said suddenly, more clearly. Shepard knew what would happen if they succeeded. What we'd become. The dropship screamed in overhead, its pilot fighting against winds that shouldn't exist. As they loaded Brooks aboard, Torres saw the battlefield they'd fought across just hours earlier. The massive crawler tanks were in full retreat. Dropships filled the sky like insects fleeing a fire. And at the center of it all, the ground was changing. Energy readings just spiked, Cortez shouted from the cockpit. Hang on. The dropship lurched upward as light erupted from the facility below. It wasn't an explosion, at least, not any kind Torres had ever seen. It was as if space itself was being torn open, reality rushing in to fill a void that shouldn't exist. Through the viewport, they watched as the light consumed everything: the facility, the mining colony, the Grey Cloak fortress. The storm above collapsed inward, forming a perfect circle of absolute darkness that seemed to swallow even time itself. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. Where the Grey Cloak stronghold had been, there was nothing. No ruins, no debris, not even a crater. Just a perfectly smooth depression in the planet's surface, as if that entire section of reality had been surgically removed. Hours later, aboard the Retribution, Torres stood at Brooks' medical pod, watching the nanites slowly separate his armor from his flesh. He'd survive, the docs said, though they weren't sure exactly what he'd survived. The logs I downloaded, Brooks said, his voice weak but clear. Before everything, the Grey Cloaks found something out there. Something that's been guiding us, pushing us to evolve. They thought they were helping humanity prepare, but what? But maybe some evolutions aren't meant to be forced. Maybe some doors aren't meant to be opened. He looked at his partially transformed arm. Shepard understood that at the end. That's why he did what he did. Torres touched the viewport of Brooks' pod. Get some rest, kid. We'll figure out what comes next when you're back on your feet. She walked to the observation deck, where other survivors gathered to watch Titan Prime recede into the distance. The storm system was returning to normal, as if trying to hide what had happened beneath it. The official reports would call it a victory, the end of the Grey Cloak threat. Politicians would make speeches about sacrifice and heroism. But Torres knew the truth. She'd seen it in those twisted corridors, in the faces of those things, in the symbols that defied understanding. This wasn't an ending. Shepard's sacrifice had bought them time, nothing more. Whatever the Grey Cloaks had been preparing humanity for was still out there, watching, waiting. And somewhere beyond the rim colonies, in the dark between stars, something ancient stirred. Torres touched the dog tags around her neck, her own, and now Shepard's, recovered from the very edge of the anomaly that had consumed him. In the reinforced glass of the viewport, her reflection stared back, and for just a moment, she thought she saw symbols like the ones from the facility reflected in her eyes. She blinked, and they were gone. But she knew, with cold certainty, that she'd see them again. They all would. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I hope you loved it. Please remember to subscribe if you did like it so you can see more videos like this. And please give us a like and a comment too. I'll see you in the next one.